The thunder of hooves echoed across the valley as Josephine Sinclair urged her team of horses faster, the wooden wheels of her wagon kicking up clouds of dust in the arid Arizona territory. The year was 1878, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape. She had left Tucson 3 days ago, her wagon loaded with supplies for her uncle's ranch near Prescott, and she was determined to make the river crossing before nightfall. "Come on, boys," she called to her horses, snapping the reins with practiced hands. "Just a little farther now." Josephine had made this journey before, but never alone. At 23, with fiery red hair tucked beneath her wide-brimmed hat and determination in her green eyes, she was intent on proving to her family that she could manage just fine without a husband or a male escort. The death of her father 6 months ago had left her with few options: marry the banker who had been courting her, or make her own way in the world. She had chosen the latter. As the wagon approached the river crossing, Josephine noticed with alarm that the usually calm waters of the Verde River were swollen from recent rains upstream. The ford she typically used was nearly submerged, but there was no other crossing for miles in either direction. With daylight fading fast, she made a split-second decision to attempt the crossing. "Steady now," she murmured to her team as they stepped cautiously into the rushing water. The horses moved forward hesitantly, water swirling around their legs. For a moment it seemed they would make it across without incident. Then, without warning, the right front wheel struck a submerged boulder. The wagon lurched violently, tilting dangerously to one side as the current pushed against it. Josephine fought to control her team, but the water's power was too great. With a sickening crack, the wheel broke free, and the wagon tipped precariously. Water rushed in, soaking her skirts and the supplies she carried. The horses whinnied in fear, struggling against their harnesses as the current pulled at the failing wagon. "Whoa! Whoa!" she cried out. But it was too late. The wagon tipped further, sending Josephine tumbling into the churning river. The cold water stole her breath as she struggled to stay afloat, her heavy skirts dragging her down. She managed to grab onto the side of the wagon, but it was rapidly filling with water and threatening to sink entirely. From the opposite bank, a shout pierced the air. Josephine turned to see a tall figure on horseback galloping toward the river's edge. Without hesitation, the rider dismounted and dove into the water. With powerful strokes, the man swam through the current toward her. As he reached the wagon, Josephine could see that he was a cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his head from the river water. "Hold on!" he called out, grabbing onto the wagon beside her. "I've got you." "My horses!" Josephine sputtered, coughing up river water. "First things first," the cowboy replied, his eyes a startling blue against his tanned face. He reached for her, strong arms encircling her waist. "I'm not letting go," he promised, his voice firm and reassuring in her ear. As the wagon continued to sink beneath them, the cowboy pulled Josephine free, keeping one arm securely around her as he fought against the current with his other arm. Her sodden clothes weighed her down, but his grip never faltered. "Kick your feet," he instructed. "Help me get us to shore." Together they battled the river, inch by painful inch. When they finally reached the shallower water near the bank, the cowboy stood, lifting Josephine into his arms and carrying her the rest of the way to dry ground. He set her down gently on the sandy shore, both of them gasping for breath. "Thank you," Josephine managed between coughs. "My horses?" "Don't worry about them just yet," the cowboy said, his breathing heavy from exertion. "They'll find their way to shore once the wagon breaks free. Horses are good swimmers." As if on cue, the wagon fully submerged, and the team, freed from the weight pulling them down, began swimming toward the bank upstream. "See?" The cowboy offered her a reassuring smile. "They'll be all right." He removed his sodden hat and ran a hand through his wet hair. "I'm Owen. Owen Sullivan." Josephine Sinclair, she replied, wringing water from her long red hair. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Owen, he corrected. And staying alive is thanks enough, Miss Sinclair. As the adrenaline began to fade, Josephine shivered in her wet clothes. Owen noticed immediately and stood, whistling sharply. His horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, trotted over from where it had been waiting. Let's get you warm, Owen said, reaching into his saddlebags and pulling out a woolen blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders, his touch gentle despite his weathered hands. There's a place not far from here where we can make camp for the night. By morning, we can see what can be salvaged from your wagon. All my supplies, Josephine said mournfully, looking back at the river where only the top of her wagon remained visible. Everything I was taking to my uncle's ranch. Things can be replaced, Owen said simply. You cannot. He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his other hand. The warmth of his body against her back provided some relief from her chilled state. What brings a lady like yourself out here alone? He asked as they rode. I'm not as delicate as I appear, Mr. Sullivan, Josephine replied, her pride stinging slightly. I've made this journey before, though admittedly with my father. After he passed, I needed to bring supplies to my Uncle Henry's ranch near Prescott. I'm going to be staying with him for a while. Henry Sinclair? Owen asked, surprise evident in his voice. You know my uncle? Owen chuckled. Everyone in these parts knows old Henry. I work at the neighboring ranch, the Double Cross. Been there about 3 years now. Then we're practically neighbors, Josephine said, feeling strangely comforted by this connection. They rode in companionable silence until they reached a small clearing sheltered by cottonwood trees. Owen's experienced hands quickly built a fire, and he hung their wet clothing on nearby branches to dry, keeping a respectful distance as Josephine changed into a spare shirt he offered her. It hung to her knees, allowing her to maintain her modesty while her dress dried. How did you happen to be at the river crossing at just the right moment? Josephine asked as they sat by the fire, eating jerky and hardtack from Owen's saddlebags. I was heading back to the ranch after delivering some horses to Fort Whipple, he explained. Took a detour to check on the river crossing since we've had rain upstream. Good thing I did. His eyes met hers across the flames, and something passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Josephine found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong jawline covered with a day's worth of stubble, the creases at the corners of his eyes that hinted at a man who smiled often, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. You don't seem like most cowboys I've met, she observed. Owen laughed, the sound warm in the cool night air. And how many cowboys have you met, Miss Sinclair? Enough to know that most wouldn't quote Shakespeare while building a campfire, she replied with a smile, having caught him murmuring lines from The Tempest earlier. He looked sheepish. You caught that, did you? My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She made sure all 5 of her children could read and appreciate good literature, even after we moved west from Boston. Boston? You're a long way from home? Home is where you make it, Owen said simply. After my parents died in a typhoid outbreak, my brothers and sisters scattered to the winds. I headed west, looking for... He paused, searching for the right words. Something bigger than myself, I suppose. And did you find it? Josephine asked softly. Owen's gaze returned to her face, lingering there with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm beginning to think I might have. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Josephine woke to find Owen already up, tending to his horse and the team of horses that had, as he predicted, made their way safely to shore. Her clothes were dry, if somewhat wrinkled, and she changed back into them behind a stand of bushes. Your wagon's still in the river, but the water's gone down some, Owen reported as they shared a breakfast of coffee and more hardtack. We might be able to salvage some of your supplies, but the wagon itself is likely beyond repair. Uncle Henry will be expecting me, Josephine said worriedly. If I don't arrive soon, he'll think something terrible has happened. Well, something terrible did happen, Owen pointed out with a wry smile. But we can ride to the Double Cross Ranch first, it's closer than your uncle's place. From there, I can send one of the boys to let Henry know you're safe, and we can figure out how to get your supplies replaced. Josephine hesitated, acutely aware of how improper it would be to arrive at a ranch full of cowboys with a man she'd just met, no matter how honorable his intentions. Sensing her concern, Owen added, Mrs. Holloway runs the kitchen at the ranch. She's a proper sort of lady who'll chaperone you and help you get settled. The boss, Mr. James, is a fair man too. He'll understand the situation. With few alternatives, Josephine agreed. They spent the morning at the river crossing, retrieving what supplies they could from her partially submerged wagon. Most of the food was ruined, but they salvaged some clothing, a few personal items, and, to Josephine's delight, her father's pocket watch, which had been sealed in a waterproof pouch. By midday, they were on the trail to the Double Cross Ranch, Josephine riding one of her rescued horses while Owen led the way on his chestnut gelding. The journey gave them time to talk, and Josephine found herself increasingly drawn to this educated cowboy, with gentle hands and a quick smile. He told her about his life on the ranch, the roundups and cattle drives, the camaraderie among the cowboys, and his dreams of someday having a place of his own. In turn, she shared stories of growing up in Tucson, her father's mercantile business, and her determination to forge her own path rather than marry for convenience. The banker who's been courting me, Mr. Fairchild, he's a good man, I suppose, she admitted. But I don't love him. I want what my parents had, a true partnership built on love and respect. That's rare enough these days, Owen observed, but worth waiting for, I'd say. They arrived at the Double Cross Ranch late in the afternoon. The sprawling property featured a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings, all surrounded by corrals and open range where cattle grazed as far as the eye could see. As Owen had predicted, Mrs. Holloway, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took Josephine under her wing immediately. She provided her with a room in the main house, fresh clothes, and a hot meal that tasted like heaven after their journey. Mr. James, the ranch owner, was equally accommodating. He dispatched one of his cowboys to inform Henry Sinclair of his niece's whereabouts and promised to help replace her lost supplies. Owen's one of my best men, Mr. James told Josephine as they sat on the porch after dinner. Lucky for you, he was in the right place at the right time. I'm beginning to believe it was more than luck, she replied, her eyes finding Owen across the yard where he was unsaddling his horse. The following days established a routine. While they waited for word from her uncle, Josephine helped Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen, mended clothes, and explored the ranch. Each evening, she and Owen would sit on the porch, talking late into the night as the stars wheeled overhead. She learned that beneath his capable exterior lay a man with depth and complexity, someone who read poetry and dreamed of building something lasting in this wild country. He discovered her quick wit, her determination, and her surprisingly practical knowledge of ranching, gleaned from summers spent at her uncle's place. On her fourth day at the Double Cross, a rider arrived from Henry Sinclair's ranch. Her uncle, it seemed, had broken his leg in a fall from a horse 2 days earlier. He was bedridden but insisted that Josephine still come to stay with him as planned, as he needed her help now more than ever. I'll take you there myself, Owen volunteered when she shared the news. We can leave tomorrow morning. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Owen seemed uncharacteristically quiet. What's on your mind? Josephine asked, nudging him gently with her shoulder. Just thinking about tomorrow, he admitted. About taking you to your uncle's place. And why does that make you so pensive? He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. Because I've grown accustomed to seeing you every day, Josephine. The thought of saying goodbye doesn't sit well with me. Her heart quickened at his words. It's not so far between ranches, she reminded him. And I suspect Uncle Henry could use some help while his leg heals. Are you suggesting I might have a reason to ride that way from time to time? I'm suggesting, Josephine said boldly, that I would be disappointed if you didn't. A slow smile spread across Owen's face. He reached out, hesitating briefly before taking her hand in his. The touch was simple, but electrifying. I've never met anyone quite like you, Josephine Sinclair, he said softly. Nor I you, Owen Sullivan. The journey to her uncle's ranch the next morning was bittersweet. They rode side by side, talking easily about everything and nothing, both acutely aware that their time together was drawing to a close. Henry Sinclair's ranch was smaller than the Double Cross but well maintained, with a sturdy main house, a barn, and several corrals. As they approached, an older man with a graying beard hobbled onto the porch, leaning heavily on a crutch. "There's my girl," he called out, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. "Thought those supplies of yours might have walked off on their own." Josephine dismounted quickly and hurried to embrace her uncle. "I'm so sorry about your leg," she said, "and about the supplies. There was an accident at the river crossing." "So I heard," Henry replied, his gaze shifting to Owen, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully a few paces back. "And this must be the hero who fished you out." "Owen Sullivan, sir," Owen said, stepping forward to shake Henry's hand. "I work over at the Double Cross." "I know James runs a tight outfit," Henry acknowledged. "Come inside, both of you. Sounds like I've got a story to hear." Over coffee and fresh-baked bread provided by Henry's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, they recounted the events of the past few days. Henry listened attentively, his shrewd eyes moving between the two young people, noting the way they finished each other's sentences and the lingering glances they exchanged. "Seems I owe you a debt of gratitude, Sullivan," he said when they'd finished. "Not many men would have jumped into that river the way you did." "Anyone would have done the same," Owen demurred. "No," Henry said firmly. "Not anyone. Now, I imagine you need to get back to your duties at the Double Cross, but I hope you'll consider my ranch open to you anytime. A man who saved my niece is always welcome here." Owen nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember that." As the afternoon wore on, the inevitable moment of departure approached. Josephine walked Owen to his horse, both of them searching for the right words. "Your uncle seems like a good man," Owen said, adjusting his saddle unnecessarily. "He is," Josephine agreed. "He and my father were very close. He's been like a second father to me." Owen nodded, then finally turned to face her fully. "Josephine, He paused, seemingly struggling with what to say next. "Yes?" she prompted, her heart beating rapidly. "I'd like to call on you properly, if that would be agreeable to you." A smile bloomed on her face. "I would like that very much, Owen Sullivan." Relief and joy mingled on his features. "Good. That's good." Impulsively, he reached out and took her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips. "Until next time, Miss Sinclair." "Until next time," she echoed, warmth spreading through her at the tender gesture. True to his word, Owen returned to the Sinclair ranch the following Sunday. He arrived on horseback, wearing his cleanest shirt and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked along the way. Henry, still confined to the house with his healing leg, observed their courtship with thinly veiled amusement and approval. Owen's visits became a regular occurrence every Sunday without fail, and occasionally during the week when his duties at the Double Cross allowed. Sometimes they rode together across the ranch, Josephine showing him her uncle's land and the places she had explored as a child. Other times, they simply sat on the porch, reading aloud to each other from one of the books in Henry's small library. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened. Josephine found herself watching the horizon each day, hoping to catch a glimpse of Owen riding toward the ranch. Owen found himself volunteering for any task that might take him in the direction of the Sinclair property. On a warm evening in late summer, nearly 2 months after the river incident, Owen arrived unexpectedly on a Wednesday. Josephine was in the garden behind the house, picking tomatoes for dinner, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Owen riding in, his face alight with excitement. "Owen!" she called, setting down her basket and hurrying to meet him. "What brings you here midweek?" He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her, taking her hands in his. "I couldn't wait until Sunday," he said, his eyes bright. "I've had some news, and I wanted to share it with you right away." "What is it?" she asked, curious about what could have brought such animation to his features. "Mr. James called me into his office this morning. The foreman, old Bill Tucker, is retiring at the end of the month. He's offered me the position." "Owen, that's wonderful!" Josephine exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. She knew how much respect he had earned at the Double Cross, and how significant this promotion was. "That's not all," Owen continued. "The position comes with the use of the small house at the north end of the property. It's nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it's a real home, Josephine. A place of my own." The significance of his words wasn't lost on her. A man with a secure position and a home of his own was in a position to consider a future that might include more than just himself. "I'm so pleased for you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "You deserve this opportunity." "I want to show it to you," he said impulsively. "The house. Would you come and see it? Your uncle too, of course, when he's able to ride again." "I'd love to see it." They stood there, hands clasped between them, a current of unspoken possibilities flowing between them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Owen leaned closer. Josephine's breath caught in her throat as she realized his intention. When his lips finally met hers, the kiss was gentle and questioning at first, then more confident as she responded, her hands moving to rest on his shoulders. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I pulled you from that river," he confessed. "I've been wanting you to," she admitted, a blush coloring her cheeks. A throat clearing behind them made them jump apart guiltily. Henry stood on the back porch, leaning on his crutch, a knowing smile on his face. "Seems like you two might have something to discuss with me," he observed dryly. Owen straightened his shoulders and approached the older man, his stance respectful but determined. "Mr. Sinclair, I'd like your permission to court your niece formally, with honorable intentions." Henry's expression remained impassive for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "About time you asked, boy. Been watching you moon over each other for weeks now." He extended his hand, which Owen shook firmly. "You have my blessing, but mind you treat her right. She's all the family I've got left." "I understand, sir," Owen replied solemnly. "And I promise I will." The following weeks were filled with a joy neither Josephine nor Owen had expected to find in the rugged Arizona territory. Owen's new position kept him busy, but he found time to visit Josephine regularly. Together, they fixed up the small house that would eventually become their home, Josephine adding touches that transformed the simple structure into something warm and inviting. Henry's leg healed slowly but steadily. By early autumn, he was able to ride short distances, and Owen brought him to see the double-cross operation and the foreman's house that Owen now occupied. The two men developed a mutual respect that evolved into genuine friendship, spending hours discussing cattle breeding, water rights, and the changing face of the territory. On a crisp October evening, as the cottonwoods along the riverbanks turned golden in the autumn light, Owen took Josephine riding to the spot where they had made camp after the river incident. He had prepared a picnic, and they sat together on a blanket, watching the river flow peacefully by, so different from the raging torrent that had nearly claimed Josephine's life months before. "Hard to believe this is the same river that almost took you from me before I even knew you," Owen remarked, his arm around her shoulders. "Perhaps it wasn't trying to take me away," Josephine suggested thoughtfully. "Maybe it was bringing us together." Owen smiled at her perspective. A rather dramatic introduction, if that was the plan. "Well, I never was one for doing things halfway," she teased. Owen's expression grew serious. He shifted to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. "Neither am I, Josephine Sinclair." With deliberate movements, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring with a modest pearl set in simple gold. It had belonged to his mother, preserved through all the changes in his life as a tangible connection to his past. "I said it once before, when I pulled you from the river," Owen said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I'm not letting go. Not now. Not ever." He held the ring between them. "Josephine, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Josephine's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was clear and certain. "Yes, Owen Sullivan. Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of all they had been through and all that lay ahead. Their wedding took place on a bright November day at the small church in Prescott. Henry Sinclair, now walking with only a slight limp, proudly escorted his niece down the aisle. Mrs. Holloway from the Double Cross wept openly, while Mr. James and the other cowboys stood respectfully in their best clothes, hats in hand. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, with a crown of late-blooming wildflowers in her hair. Owen, clean-shaven and wearing a new suit ordered from Tucson, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't believe his good fortune. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt. They promised to cherish and protect each other, to build a life together in this challenging land, and to never let go, no matter what rivers they might have to cross. The years that followed brought both joys and hardships, as is the way of life on the frontier. Owen continued as foreman at the Double Cross, earning a reputation as a fair and capable leader. Josephine, never one to sit idle, started a small school for the ranch children, teaching them reading and arithmetic alongside practical skills for life in the territory. Their family grew with the arrival of a daughter, whom they named Elizabeth after Owen's mother, followed 2 years later by a son they called Henry, in honor of the uncle who had brought them together. Henry Sinclair doted on his grandniece and grandnephew, teaching them to ride almost as soon as they could walk. As the children grew, so did the Sullivan family's dreams. With careful saving and Henry's guidance, Owen and Josephine eventually purchased a parcel of land adjoining both the Double Cross and Sinclair ranches. There, they built their own ranch, the River Cross, named in commemoration of their fateful meeting. On the 5th anniversary of the day Josephine's wagon had tipped into the Verde River, the couple stood on the bank at the same crossing, now marked by a sturdy bridge that Owen had helped design. Their children played nearby under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye, while Henry sat on his horse, supervising the cattle drive that would take their first herd to market. "Did you ever imagine," Josephine asked, leaning into her husband's embrace, "that day when you dove into the river, that we'd end up here?" Owen's arms tightened around her waist as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "No," he admitted, "but I knew, even then, that you were someone worth holding on to." Josephine turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes as bright and determined as the day they'd met. "And you've never let go, just as you promised." "And I never will," Owen vowed, bending to kiss his wife as the river flowed peacefully beside them, a constant reminder of the day their lives had changed forever. In the distance, a new wagon approached the bridge, the first of many that would cross safely thanks to their efforts. Life in the Arizona Territory remained challenging, but Owen and Josephine Sullivan had found in each other the strength to face whatever came their way, their love as enduring as the land itself.